What's up guys, Dutogira here, and welcome to our discussion of the current meta in Hearthstone. We are halfway through Blackrock Mountain, so just as kind of a timestamp for this, that means that we are currently in week 3 of Blackrock Mountain. We've seen the release of such cards as Twilight Whelp, Volcanic Lumberer, Blackwing Technician, Gang Up, Quick Shot, Imp Gang Boss, and the like. But we have not yet seen most of the dragons, such as Hungry Dragon, Chromagus, any of those. So there's the timestamp for this. This video is basically just an analysis of the meta right now, and I am using Tempo Storm's site for this, but I have my own personal twist on this and how to kind of actually cheat around what the current top tier decks are and obtain a better win rate based on the fact that people will be using this information to ladder. So currently, according to Tempo Storm, which is a site that a lot of people use, the highest tier decks include Zoo, which has been made far more powerful given the release of one Imp Gang Boss and right. Face Hunter, Oil Rogue, Midrange Druid, we know all of these, and Midrange Demon Lock, which is kind of a new thing that's kind of like Hand Lock, but it doesn't really use quite as strong of minions. It prefers to use, well, demons. So, yeah, those are the deck lists. The idea behind a lot of these decks is, well, they can abuse a lot of the new cards, or in the case of these three, Face Hunter, Oil Rogue, and Midrange Druid, these two were already among the most powerful decks in the old meta. And in Tier 2 we see Handlock, Midrange Paladin, Priest, Control Warrior, Grim Patron Combo Warrior, I guess Mech Shaman and Freeze Mage. So, I did recently hit Legend, actually. I don't have a screenshot of that on my PC, but I did hit Legend. Actually, let me pull up Hearthstone real quick, and I can just show you guys and prove it. And I hit Legend with a basically using this method of ranking up. So this is just the proof. I understand that this so far is boring, but we'll get into the interesting analysis pretty quickly here. Bam. We hit Legend. And then we started messing around with Velen combo, which is why my rank is lower than it was at entry, which was like at 272. But still. Velen combo is a fun deck. That'll be for a different video. It's actually not terrible, but still. So, when you look at these top decks right now, there are certain apparent weaknesses in them. For example, again, with Zoo and with Face Hunter, you have a very strong weakness to decks that can thrive against aggro, specifically Priest. Especially if you make an anti-aggro Priest, you can just destroy those two decks. And actually I can show you guys the anti-aggro Priest that I've been using. I don't have it as an overlay because the problem with the anti-aggro Priest is that it loses to all three other mid-range decks that are currently top tier, as well as a lot of the tier 2 decks that are also mid-range. But if you wanted to use an anti-aggro Priest, something like this that just goes for a lot of early game minions and board presence is really strong. But yeah, that's that. Enough of Hearthstone. With the other two, or with a lot of the other decks though, Handlock, which I've been referring to as Handyman, because Handlock fused with Demon Lock, Handyman. Yeah. fun. Mid-range paladin, control warrior, and such. A lot of these mid-range decks have an extreme weakness to Cancer Hunter. Yeah, I know, you feel like scum, but honestly it's not Face Hunter. It's no longer Ebola. It's just cancer. It's okay. Which sounds so bad, but still. Yeah, turns out Cancer has a really, really good matchup against a lot of other mid-range decks because it is faster by nature than almost every other mid-range deck. And it's really good against control because mid-range naturally beats control. So when you run into control warriors or even combo warriors, which do fall into the category of a mid-range deck, mid-range paladin even is an even matchup. Handlock's favorable, mid-range druid is favorable, oil rogue is ridiculously favored, and mid-range mid-range demon lock also ridiculously favored, while Cancer Hunter still has a decent chance against Face Hunter and Zoo. So Cancer Hunter is really good, but for the most part, it's what I would advise using to rank up if you are not seeing a ton of Face Hunters and Zoo decks, because, well, yeah. The two really fast aggro decks are going to beat a mid-range deck the majority of the time. So even if you have a chance to win with Cancer, you want to kind of just play a few games. It doesn't matter what deck you use, just play like 3 ranked games. What are you seeing most of? Aggro, mid-range, or control? If the answer is mid-range or control, then you want to be running Cancer. If the answer is aggro, then I would advise running something more along these lines. It is a deck that I have built, which admittedly was inspired by a list created by Taiki M13. So I have to give credit where credit is due, but this is modified to my own preferences. Yeah. Basically, this deck has a lot of potential against faster decks while still being really good against control, and because it does have some really powerful late game, decks like Handlock are not a bad matchup. Decks like, you know, any of the mid-range decks, if you start getting to the late game, you can do really, really well. So, yeah, with the Nazarene itself, a lot of people ask why the Nazarene. Honestly, it has a lot to do with resurrecting Blade Masters. That's the dream. You resurrect a Blade Master, that's why I have nicknamed Blade Master Lazarus. It's a biblical reference. If you do not understand it, I highly advise looking it up. It's a great book to read, but that's not important. I know you guys didn't come here to be Bible thumped. So, that's kind of my analysis, is what you want to do with ranking up is kind of find, and apparently mid-range hunter's tier 3 now. I don't really buy it. You want to find what counters the tier 1 decks, because even if the tier 1 decks are super strong, they've each got their own weaknesses, and you know, if you have 2 decks that you can hop between, you really don't need to be using, you know, Cancer Hunter and kind of an anti-aggro priest. Really all you need is something that can handle aggro. Maybe you play Control Warrior, and something that is a lot more mid-rangey, maybe mid-range druid or oil rogue. Any sort of mix like that. You want those 2 decks because in this meta you're not going to need very much control. It just doesn't happen. Like, you don't have to worry about out-controlling controlled decks. You just have to worry about surviving the mid-range decks and the aggro decks. So that's kind of what I think of the current meta and how to actually counter it. Because with everybody playing these kinds of decks, if you are to play, you know, Control Warrior and some mid-range deck, maybe it's mid-range Paladin, maybe it's mid-range Druid, maybe it's Oil Rogue, maybe it's, you know, mid-range Hunter, which I chose because it's cheap and I usually only play Priest. That's all you really need to rank up in the current meta. It's really all you need. So yeah. Now comes the interesting part though, because I want to show you guys a different deck that I think, until people figure out what's going on with it, it is actually really, really strong in the current meta. So let's fire up Hearthstone one last time. I've been playing around with this at Legend tier, and it's actually been losing only a few times. I believe it or not, even though I have dropped from 272 to 493, that's just how Legend works. You lose more ranks than you gain losing versus winning. So this deck actually has gone one win above even. That's not amazing as a record, but given that these are all Legend players, and this is a deck that I'm not entirely certain I am piloting perfectly, I think that's pretty good. So, the deck I have named Emperor Velen, because, surprise surprise, it runs the Emperor Tharzan Prophet Velen combo, where you can play Emperor Tharzan and discount either Prophet Velen or a Mind Blast or multiples, and blast 20 damage at your opponent in one turn. Now what the deck also does, which is really cool, is it utilizes a lot of the new dragon cards, because in Hearthstone right now, it turns out the dragons are actually ridiculously strong in terms of stat value compared to mana cost. When you look at Blackwing Technician, a 3 mana 3/5, that's 4 drop stats on a 3 drop. If you're holding a dragon, that's really good. If you look at Twilight Whelp, that's a 1 mana 2/3. That's ridiculously good stats for a 1 drop, in fact, 2 drop stats, if you're holding a dragon. And Twilight Whelp, I know it's questionable, maybe you could just run Zombie Chow, but I'll get to it. Twilight Drake itself, this deck is a combo deck. It runs a lot of card draw with Acolyte of Pain, Loot Hoarder, Azure Drake, other cards like that, Power Word Shield, and Northshire. So Twilight Drake is usually around a 4/6, 4/7 as a 4-drop, which is, again, really strong for its mana cost. This means that the deck has kind of a mid-rangey nature in that its minions are going to be a lot beefier than what your opponent can afford to put out, aside from turn 2. Their turn 2 is a little bit of a dud. But still, that's largely irrelevant in my experience with this deck. I don't usually lose from not hitting a 2-drop or anything like that. But that means in the earlier stages of the game, you have superior minions to your opponent the majority of the time, and then in the late game, the deck is so packed with card draw that you're not only drawing into your high stat minions consistently, but you then draw into a combo to deal 20 damage, or failing that, simply use your superior minions to bowl your opponent over, and without even really needing the full combo, you just kind of Mind Blast your opponent to death, or Mind Blast them and smite them, or whatever. There's plenty of ways to obtain lethal damage with this deck. On top of that, this deck has performed incredibly well against aggro, much to my surprise. I thought that would be this deck's one failing, but it's actually one of this deck's best matchups. The reason for that, first of all, is Twilight Whelp. With Twilight Whelp, you can get a 1 mana 2/1 if you need it, or a 1 mana 2/3, assuming you're holding something like a Twilight Drake or an Azure Drake or Alexstrasza. It happens sometimes, but it still makes Twilight Drake good. And follow that up with Acolytes of Pain, Blackwing Technicians, give them Velen's Chosen. You can get a lot going on. And you have Defender of Argus, which means where mid-range falls short is that even though its minions are slightly better quality than an aggro deck, aggro doesn't care because its minions are faster. It just kills the mid-range deck before that high-value minion advantage kicks in. Argus forces your opponent to trade, and since you run 2 of them, that means effectively, while you are running superior stat minions, you are running 4 taunts among them. And each of your minions is going to get a buff off of it. It's not uncommon for me to have something like a 2/6 Acolyte of Pain with taunt. No deck ever wants to see that. That is so just hideous to your opponent, and it's beautiful for you because it means he's going to have to sink 6 damage into that Acolyte and give you 2 cards off of it. It's beautiful. The other cool thing with the deck is that it runs a ton of spell damage. You've got Azure Drakes giving you spell damage, you've got Velen's Chosen giving you spell damage, and you, in a way, have Prophet Velen giving you a minor amount of spell damage. But the point of the matter is this deck runs 4 different sources of spell damage, and Velen's Chosen makes whatever minion is granted it a lot tankier, giving it +4 health. This means Holy Smites are really good, not only because they synergize with Velen to, you know, smite your opponent for 4 or with +1 spell damage 6 in one turn, but also because they frequently become 1 mana deal 3s or even 1 mana deal 4s by that same token Holy Nova against something like a Grim Patron combo deck. It's not uncommon for you to be able to drop a Northshire, put Velen's Chosen on it, and then just Holy Nova away a board of Grim Patrons. You don't need the Akanai Circle combo because Holy Nova with spell damage does it for you. So, the deck has a lot of cool features where it's just, against aggro, it has plenty of taunt. It forces your opponent to trade, and quite frankly, when your opponent trades, you get value out of it because you're going to be drawing cards, or you'll heal your minions and still draw cards, or whatever. And then once you make it to the late game, because of all the cards you've drawn, you're going to kill your opponent a lot of the time. This deck's kind of weakness is that it is possible to draw rather poorly the spell to minion ratio. Given you have 2 Velen's Chosen, that's 2, a Shadow Word Death 3, 2 Mind Blasts, we're at 5, 2 Power Word Shields, 2 Smites 9, 2 Holy Novas, 11 spells. There are times where you can just kind of draw dead. On top of that, the curve of this deck is shifted a little bit later into the game, so it is possible for you to have kind of a dead draw where you just draw reactive spells, but it doesn't happen all that often. The other cool thing about the deck is that you can play it in 2 different modes. One of them is against aggro, where you just throw minions out there, and you need things to trade with, so you just play cards to trade with. In those cases, Twilight Whelp, it doesn't really matter that much if it's a 1 mana 2/3 or 1 mana 2/1. Admittedly, it usually changes the number of minions Twilight Whelp plays, or can trade with. But it's still a minion that can help trade and buy you more time. Acolyte of Pain becomes an all-star in that matchup because 1 mana, or 1 attack versus 3 attack usually doesn't make that big of a difference against a lot of the aggro decks of the current era. Blackwing Technician's amazing because a 3 mana 3/5 means you can already trade well. Argus buffing up things does awesomely. And when you just spam cards, well, sure, Twilight Drake gets a little bit worse, but it's still a dragon, it's still a 4 attack creature, and it's still usually around a 4/5 because quite frankly this deck still has a really high level of card draw. The other mode you can play it in is a little more greedy, where you don't even necessarily have to play Twilight Whelps when you draw them. You can save them as triggers for Blackwing Technician if you don't have other dragons. You can save them until you get a dragon and then just drop them with an Argus to create a 3/4 taunt. And in slower games, you've got Alexstrasza as well, who can set your opponent's health to 15, enabling you to combo them to death with Velen and Mind Blast the next turn. So there have been a couple of times where this deck has just done some ridiculous things. I will warn people who want to try this deck out. I think this is really cool. I think this is really strong against a lot of mid-range decks and aggro decks, which is what the meta is. So I think, at least before the next swing of Blackrock, this is a really strong deck, just from my experience testing it at Legend tier. Bear that in mind. I've been testing this at Legend. I haven't been dirtling around in play mode. This has been a Legend tier deck that I've been testing, and it has been doing really well. The only bad matchup is Control Warrior, which is almost an auto loss. And I faced up against 3 of those in, 10 games? Given that I only lost 4 of them? You tell me. How strong is this deck? The reason Control Warrior sucks is you are trying to burst your opponent down. I mean, when you Alexstrasza them, it doesn't matter if the warrior has 20 armor that their health is at 15. They're still effectively at 35. You can't combo from 35. It's not going to happen. But against almost any other deck, I've literally gone to having 0 cards left in my deck off against a druid, and Velen was the last card. That was the only reason we even got that far. I would have killed him a lot sooner had that not been the case. But this deck just does incredibly against mid-range. It does really well against aggro, because it has early drops. It has 4 taunt minions compared to, maybe a Belcher. 1 gets silenced. If you get a Belcher silenced, you lose the 1/2 Death Rattle taunt that makes Belcher so powerful. If you get a minion silenced when it has Argus, you still got another minion over there with taunt. So, pick your poison on which one you want to silence, but you've still got to slog through it. And against other mid-range decks, again, because the deck has so much spell damage, Smite actually deals really well with Shredders, and you know, sometimes you can even get double spell damage going at once, and Smite deals with things like other people's Azure Drakes. Really good. The deck is weird against Handlock. I will warn people of that. Sometimes you draw Mind Blasts, and you can just surprise the heck out of a Handlock because he thinks you're playing Dragon Priest, and you kind of are. But he doesn't expect the Velen combo to be coming out as well. He just kind of thinks you have this wonky dragon thing going on, and maybe the card draws because you actually need the dragons to trigger text like on Twilight Whelp and Blackwing Tech. And so the handlock gets kind of low, and then you have one spell damage minion out, and then you just Mind Blast, Smite. 15 damage. That's usually around the health a handlock will hover at, by the way. So, yeah. However, if a handlock draws, first of all, plays 2 heal bots. Most of them don't, but I guess because the meta is getting faster, a lot of them are starting to run 2 heal bots. If the handlock draws both of his heal bots, you're sad, because you've got to deal an extra 16 damage, and getting through, you know, the Molten Giants that are inevitably coming out because you have to get him, you know, to 20 or under, which is the range where Molten Giant can be played, in order to kill him. So you have to usually deal with those Moltens. So, I mean, if your opponent draws both heal bots, you're sad, but on the other hand, sometimes you just kill him before you can do that. And sometimes you go so fast that your opponent actually gets really scared that you're running Light Bomb, because he doesn't know what deck this is, because it is something that I homebrewed. It is unique to me prior to now when I share it on YouTube. So, yeah. This is, it's just an interesting deck. I think it's worth giving a shot, and quite frankly, I think it could get some people to Legend. So, yeah. Just be aware that, as I said, when you run into this whole list of decks, you can beat mid-range Demon Lock with Emperor Velen. You can beat Zoo easily. You can beat Face Hunters. It's not even that difficult. You can beat Oil Rogues. They can't deal with 4 taunts, especially given that, you know, sapping minions doesn't do that much against you when you already go faster than the Oil Rogue does. Mid-range Druid, okay. I did have 1 loss to a mid-range Druid. That was the only other loss I had in my 10 games. 3 to Control Warriors, 1 to a mid-range Druid, who just had the combo. He had what he needed. Handlocks, I faced 1 and I beat him. I faced another one who had a bunch of heal bots. I top-decked him with a Mind Blast and got him. But Handlock definitely could be a harder matchup. If I hadn't top-decked him, I'm certain I would have lost that. Paladins are actually a super easy matchup. When you run cards like Acolyte of Pain, the Paladin just cries because suddenly Muster for Battle is just a 3-mana, equip a 1/4 weapon and summon 3 1/1s, while your opponent's just going to taunt up that Acolyte of Pain and then draw 2 to 3 cards off of your muster, plus dealing with all the minions. So Paladin's a really easy matchup. Other priests, the most they're going to have is like a 1 of Light of the Naru in their hand by the end, and so you can actually just stay in the game against another priest because you're faster than them. You're more of a mid-range deck than most other priests are. So you go faster than them, you force them to react, you can handle them with your own minions, etc., etc. And then you just Alex them down to 15. The most they can do is heal to 20. You can take them. You can do it. Other priests aren't actually that big of a problem. So, yeah. As I said, Control Warrior is a bad matchup. Combo Warrior is actually phenomenally good because of the spell damage Holy Novas that can be going on. And yeah, I don't know. I've been messing around with this deck, and I like Twilight Whelp more and more, actually. Just by virtue of the fact that you don't have to play him as a 1-mana 2/3. Like, sure, the dude could be kind of like a Zombie Chow in an ideal situation where you've got a Twilight Drake, a Twilight Whelp, and like a Blackwing Tech. That's your dream opener with a Loot Hoarder, maybe, and sacking the Loot Hoarder before it's time to play the Drake. But you can also choose to just hold Twilight Whelp, and he's a dragon. He is a dragon. Like, people forget that a lot, and so he's a good trigger for Blackwing Tech. And as Blackwing Corruptor comes out too, the 5-mana 5/4 that has a battle cry of deal 3 damage if you're holding a dragon. I mean, I don't know if that really has a spot in this list. We're already hard-pressed for dragons, and I don't know how much I could actually afford to lose in this list. I don't think there is really a spot for Blackwing Corruptor, but the point of the matter remains, if you want to make more of a hardcore dragon priest, Twilight Whelp is a dragon. It's a lot better than I gave it credit for. Because at best, it's a better zombie chow. And at worst, it's still a dragon to trigger dragon text on Blackwing Tech and make a 3-mana 3/5. So, you can kind of choose there. But, yeah. I think this is a really good deck because, again, you look at the top tier list, and every single one of these decks can be manhandled by Emperor Velen. You look at the tier 2 list, everything but Control Warrior and a Nutdraw Mech Shaman can be handled by Emperor Velen. Whoops. So, I mean, yeah. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know about Freeze Mage, which is currently tier 2. I didn't play against Freeze Mage with Emperor Velen. I suppose if you start seeing a ton of Freeze Mages, for whatever reason, you could board out, actually the Shadow Word Death. Because you don't... Well, no, you can't board out the Death. That's stupid. Hang on, dude. Slow down. Against a Freeze Mage. Okay, if you're seeing a lot of Freeze Mages, drop an Argus for a Kazan. But you have to be seeing a lot of Freeze Mages, and quite frankly, I think this deck still might be okay against Freeze Mage. Because, I mean, you still just draw a lot of cards. You're still a threat to them, you can still combo them. And it's your combo versus theirs. Admittedly, they have Ice Block, and you don't have Ice Block. But you go faster than they do. You take the initiative and deal more damage to them than they can deal to you until it's Alex time, so... I don't think Freeze Mage is that bad. There's ways to play around it. So yeah. That is Emperor Velen. That is the list. And, thank you guys for watching. Actually, I do have a treat for you guys. If you guys are interested. The first is maybe not so much of a treat as just an interesting factoid that I did not know about before. I found this when I was at rank 3 with Priest, and I didn't know you could get golden turnips. Apparently you can. Did anyone else know about the golden turnip thing? Yeah. Golden turnips. Huh. Interesting. The other one actually is funny. So, this is the funny thing. Now, you guys can't see it right now. You can see the minus 18 from fatigue, but you can't see what his health total is at. This priest is at negative 163 health, off of me BMing him. No, that Twilight Drake is not mine. I don't think. Wait, was it? Was this with the Velen deck? Running Loatheb? No, if I was running a Loatheb in Mind Control, it wouldn't have been. That had to be taken from Sylvanas. Shame. But what happened is, he had 2 Northshire Clerics out on the board and was at 7 health. So, I had a Pyromancer, and I had a Circle of Healing. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 minions on the board. If you get all 9 minions damaged and do a circle, he draws 18 cards. Well, he was fresh out of cards. His deck was straight up empty. So from 7 health left, I used a Pyro, Power Word Shield, and Circle of Healing and made him draw 18 cards into mill. If you do the math on that, that is 170 damage in 1 turn. And I did it all to him in 1 turn. So that was pretty funny. That's the most damage I've ever dealt to a guy, and he is at negative 163 under there. There is no way he would be at negative 16 off the board. You guys can see 5 from Loatheb, 4 from the Drake, 3 from Pyro, 4 from another Blade Master, 1 from a Slime. Yeah, none of those are 18. So there's no way I could have dealt 18 at once unless I did mill him to negative 18 cards, which means he would take 170 damage. At the very least, even if you guys don't believe me about him being at 7 health and going to negative 163, he is at negative 140, even if he was at full health when I started this. So that was funny. That was amazing, and I thought that was a good thing to share with you guys. But this is kind of a creation of mine that I think would be a really good alternative to running a mid-range deck. So if you want to play, like, you know, something just to counter kind of the aggro or the mid-range decks, you want to play just whatever. Try running it in synergy with Emperor Velen. Try running it with this, because this deck is phenomenal against Zoo, phenomenal against Face Hunter, great against mid-range Demon Lock, because mid-range Demon Lock can't punish you like Hand Lock can, and great against Oil Rogue, because what's an Oil Rogue going to do to you? He has to get through too many taunts, the same problem that Face Hunter faces. And against mid-range Druid, I've won 2, lost 1, as I said. So, I mean, you could kind of see with that. Mid-range Druid, it just kind of depends on who manages to go faster. And quite frequently, because this deck's minions are of superior quality to mid-range Druid, you know, a Blackwing Tech is already going to trade evenly with the Shredder most of the time, not to mention Power Word Shield and Northshire coming in, and Velen's Chosen coming in, and Argus coming in. I could go on. It's just, it does really well against mid-range Druid too. So against all 5 of the tier 1 decks, Emperor Velen is awesome. And this is proven, tested, you know, certificate of value at Legend. So, yeah. Thank you guys for watching. That's my analysis of the current meta and what to do about it. Play some Velen combo, do some interesting stuff. Thank you guys for watching. And I will see you guys next time. Take care.